Yeah, I mean, the glaringly obvious one is obviously ROAS. If
Yep.
people like it, they're gonna buy. Like, that's probably, like, the bottom line one that I always look at. But also things like click-through rates, especially with creative, just seeing the kind of how much people are actually engaging with it and whether or not they're going to buy, but click-through rate's an interesting one to look at.
Yep. Yep.
And then, although it's not something that I hold too much stock in, engagement is also one that I look at. So I'll look at comments and things because sometimes just looking at the numbers, say like within Ads Manager, you can think, oh, the ad's doing well. And then you could go on and see that, maybe it's doing well for 50% of the people it's hitting. And for the other 50%, you've said something that has absolutely got them up the wrong way. And, so it's kind of keeping an eye on all of the elements, not just going, all right, that's got a good ROAS, that's fine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Overdrive Digital Podcast. As always, hope you enjoy this. Do give us a bit of social love, give it a share, come and follow us on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, all the usual places. So for this episode, we're going to be kind of focusing on messaging and creative across paid social and PPC. I'm joined by Abby from our paid social team. Hey Abby.
Hello. Hi.
And Nina from our PPC team. Hey
Hello.
Nina.
Hey guys.
How are you this fine morning?
Bit cold, but I've got my tea with me, so yeah, ready to take on this little podcast.
Teed up and ready to go.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So, uh, messaging and creative, I think, is a really interesting topic, and obviously, lots of different conversations around it and lots of different approaches. Starting with PPC, Nina, what are you kind of seeing working at the moment across Google Ads?
So we're seeing a lot of things that are quite adapted to the current climate. So, for example, within headlines, we found that call to actions such as shop now, quite direct call to actions have quite a good impact on click through rate. We've also found that things like direct to doorstep delivery has been very effective as well. So things that communicate the service as well as being quite direct to the consumers, something we found that's helped quite a lot with our ad creation.
Excellent. And has any of that changed in the situation that we're in right now? Like, have you had to change ad copy and messaging to adapt to the new normal, as it were?
Yeah, I have quite a bit. So, for example, with one of our B2C clients, I've had to change some of the copy to situate around enjoying the services at home, um,
Yep.
which is, something that across the board, I think, even when you look at the competition in ads, is something that a lot of people are kind of aiming towards at the moment. So one really good thing is to always remain as individual as possible with your ads, but then also look at what the competition are doing.
I think that's something a lot of people miss is actually just looking at search results. Like
Yeah,
it's such a basic thing that gets skipped sometimes, but searching around for queries that you're targeting and seeing
absolutely.
what the competition are putting in is just such a basic but important step.
Yeah, it's so easily missed, but that's something that I dedicate a little bit of time to, just being like, okay, what are they doing and how can we do it better, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, because the goal is standing out on that page, isn't it? Like,
Absolutely.
what are you going to say that's different to the other three ads in that top pack?
Yeah,
You know.
for sure.
So on the paid social side, creative and messaging is kind of totally different. Like, it's a different context. You've got lots of different options. What are you seeing at the moment, Abby?
Yeah, we've seen some interesting changes. Definitely within, like, there's a lot more keyboard warriors out there, so you've got to be a lot more careful with your messaging. Like, I think
Yeah,
because people have a lot more time on their hands.
Mm.
armchair
Um,
politicians and keyboard
yeah,
warriors.
which can be a bit of a nightmare. But just been avoiding um, any words like key or essential or stash or stock or things like that we might have used before. Like some of the crafting companies that we work with, we refer to like your stash and your stock a lot, which we've kind of stopped doing since all this happened, especially since people were like stockpiling toilet paper. We were like, right, we need to, ease back on this a bit.
Yep.
Um, Definitely agree with Nina on like the messaging about that you can have it at your house or
Hmm.
to your door has worked really well. Although we've had to be a bit careful with that with international delivery because people will say, to my door, but I live in this really remote place, and you're like, oh, maybe not to your door. You might have to go and click and collect it from somewhere, kind of
To
thing. But
most people's
Yeah.
doors.
yeah, and like brackets, most people's doors. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, in terms of creative, there was definitely a big change and more of a push towards user generated content, um, which is interesting in itself because it's more difficult to like kind of get the branding of a company in because you're
Yeah.
not in control of it as much, so that's difficult. And we have seen it work quite well, but also things that are maybe too user generated looking like that. I don't know. It's there's been a few ones where it's been like people in their house doing activities, and it's been a little bit too on the nose for people. Maybe like, oh, I'm in
Right.
my house and they're in their house, and we're all stuck in our houses. Like, not overly inspiring, which is what we wanted. So that
Yep.
kind of stuff actually hasn't worked as
Yep.
well as we thought it would, which has been
Yeah.
interesting.
I've seen a lot of big ad campaigns from, say, like large banks where they're filming the ad at home. Like it's
Yeah,
user-generated content in a big ad campaign as well.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's definitely an interesting shift. Is there anything that's changed in terms of placements that are working, or like the underlying fundamentals? I assume are the same. It's just slightly different context. But have you seen any shift in?
Yeah, we've seen a shift of more traffic coming through Instagram Explore for sure, because I
Okay.
think people just have more time
Yep.
to browse.
And explore.
So that's been interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Browse and
It's
explore, discover.
it's a
But
relatively new placement as well, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, it is. I
Relatively new. Yeah,
think it was
one of the
last
new
year.
ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting stuff. So, but I guess it's, back to that point of being able to adapt, but the fundamentals sound the same in that, clear calls to action, you know,
yeah,
clearly pushing out your USPs,
Hmm.
making sure your headlines are nice and clear, etc., etc., but just being able to adapt to what's working now. Is
Yeah.
that a fair
yeah.
assessment, you think?
Definitely.
So, on the kind of testing side, because when you take over an account or build a new one out from scratch, one of the key things that we do is testing creative to see what works. And we were talking about this on a call yesterday, Abby, about when you've got really, even if you've got a very clear proposition and very clear USPs, you need to find that perfect combo of
Mm,
creative headline copy and where and how you introduce those points.
yeah.
How should brands be planning that, and how should you be planning your testing, do you think?
Um, so obviously there's a dynamic creative test that we
Hmm.
use a lot, which is where you are able to basically like bulk upload a bunch of different creative and test it, which is great. But I think also people do miss out on the fact that a headline or a news description or even a call to action can make a huge difference to an ad as well. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily just about the creative. Like you said, it's about that winning combo. So there are options to test multiple headlines, primary text, and descriptions. But I mean, something that we found maybe especially in top funnel is sometimes shop now is the best CTA, but other
Really?
times it's not. Other times it's
Yeah.
learn more. It kind of depends on the product, and that's not something that you're able to test without having different ads.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
So
I
do you
think
think there's a bit in that planning stage of, before you even get to the ads manager, just going through an exercise of kind of like, what are our USPs and benefits and
yeah,
differentiators, and drafting up a load of variations and pooling together creative to understand what you can test? Like, is that a thing, do you think?
definitely, definitely. And I think also just yeah, like a good brainstorming session is so underrated with these things
Yeah.
because even now there's new things that are coming out of USPs for companies that we're working with. It's like, oh yeah, that's a really good thing that they do. We should talk about that. And it's like it's been missed,
Hmm.
because you kind of get in the right. We need to talk about these things, but actually, the things that are important to people change
Yep.
a lot.
Yep. Big time.
Um, yeah, it was
Big time.
interesting. Like when there was the like climate crisis marches going on, and we did some advertising towards like recycled like materials and things, and it worked really well, but only within that space of time. There's also like working towards what's going on at the moment as well.
Yeah, I guess there's a big element of having your finger on the pulse
Yeah,
and
definitely.
being aware of what's happening in the world, you know,
Yeah,
and being able to respond and just, or even just test a response, I think,
yeah.
and what's, looking at a calendar and going, what's coming up, what's relevant to the brand, what can we jump on, what shouldn't we jump on?
I think it's like Nina was saying before as well, like just seeing what competitors are doing as well, and not copying, but just seeing, okay, so that's that angle that they're taking. How
Yes.
could we do it? How could we do it better, or how can we do it completely differently?
Yeah. And on Facebook, you've got the ads library, haven't you? So you can
Yeah,
kind of dig in and have a snoop.
such a useful tool.
It's amazing, isn't
So
it?
good.
Yeah. So Nina, on the PPC side, obviously totally different
Yeah.
mechanics, right? So, three headlines, two descriptions,
Hmm.
plenty of different extensions to test. Like how do you think brands need to plan that before they, even before they start drafting up ads? Like what sort of things should people be doing?
They need to, well, in my opinion, they need to look at a lot of their identifiers. So, like, who are their audience? What have they responded to historically? And how do they think the attitudes are going to change to that given the current climate? So, you need to be really careful with your messaging, as Abby was saying before. Also, they need to have a look at some of the services that they offer. For example, if you do have, specific delivery dates, do we want to advertise that as a separate site link with your ad? Are there new USPs or existing USPs that you have that will be quite useful in this situation? For example, does your site have a mission statement on the current climate that we can pop into a site link or something like that? Adapt your call out extension, so plan out what you think are the most relevant features of your business that will attract more, a wider audience, or kind of keep your audience retention. So it's a lot of forward planning in terms of your USPs, and staying on brand, but then also being sensitive to everything
Yeah,
going around you.
that makes sense. And what do you prioritize within a search ad? So we got the three headlines, descriptions. Like what's going to have the biggest impact, do you think?
Well, trends that I've seen, the biggest impact definitely, as I mentioned before, are the more direct CTAs: shop now, online now, free shipping, worldwide shipping, all those things that entice a consumer. Put it in the headline.
Yeah.
They're not gonna spend years reading an expanded text ad. They want to know exactly what you're offering, when, and how.
Yeah. And so starting with the headline.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with the three headlines that we got available to
Mhm.
us, so headline three may or may not show,
Exactly.
depending on the search query or the time or
Yeah,
the
exactly.
direction of the wind. Um, so what do there's so many different elements to it, aren't there? So we
Mm.
clearly need to get good call to actions in, as you've
Yeah.
mentioned, but we also need to make sure that we've got keyword relevance
Yes,
in place.
absolutely.
How do you balance that between your headlines one and two and potentially using the headline three as well?
So it is a delicate balance. Normally, the formula that I follow is headline one, always include the keywords in your text. It's the most important thing. It's what people are going to see first. It's going to increase the ad relevance. Then, with the description lines, try and include as many keywords as possible while still making the messaging quite succinct. For example, if you're advertising for jewelry, you don't want to be like, we sell a necklace, lots of necklaces in different colors, buy your necklaces, like, all in the description lines. You want to make it so it's readable, people know exactly what they're going to find, what they're going to buy, but then also pay attention to how Google will view your ad in terms of the relevance. So you've got to kind of strike a balance between what does Google want to see, how is my ad going to get that good quality score, and also how is it going to read to an audience.
To a human being.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Not just,
always a tough one, isn't it?
yeah.
That's always a tough one. Um, so on the PPC side,
Mhm,
like on both platforms, actually, I mean, Abby, you mentioned dynamic creative as a feature on Facebook ads for testing
mhm.
creative. On the Google Ads side, like what sort of tools have we got available or settings, or like how should people be mechanically, I guess, testing their
So
ads?
you have this, the Google has a built-in feature where you can A/B test or split test your ads. So it gives you the option to create a completely different ad, and then it will give you sort of the difference between metrics to let you know how it's performing in comparison. And
Hmm.
then another tool that I found quite useful is the ad preview and diagnostic tool. So essentially, what you can do is type in your keyword, and it will tell you if your ad is showing, and it will let you choose the location of interest, the language, the device, and also whether you can apply to an audience to it or not. And it will, yeah, essentially just show you if your ads are showing up how they're supposed to, which is something that I found quite useful if I want to make sure that I create a new ad and it's showing up for the keywords that we already have.
That
um,
makes sense. So almost kind of viewing it as a customer would
yeah,
view it. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Again, like such a good step that gets missed is like you. I think as a that someone who works in this field, you get so caught up in the is this ad going to work from a quality score perspective,
Hmm.
and you forget that human beings are reading these ads,
Exactly.
and you're asking a human being to take action off the back of it. So being able to just view it from a customer's perspective.
Yeah. And that's when creative control comes a little bit into it. So obviously if you're working with a brand and they have a specific message or any kind of, specific language that they want you to use, you've got to strike the balance between, we want the keywords included, but we also don't want it to read in a way that is mechanical and that
Yeah,
also adheres to what they want to, present themselves as a brand. So you've got to be very, very careful. I mean, there are so many things that you can do to test the difference in ads. So, for example, the synonyms that you use, best practice is to have 3 ads in an ad group and make sure that while you're communicating the same message, don't use the same headlines, try and vary the descriptions, switch them up a bit. You don't really want to have it mechanical and reading as the same across your entire account.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and even just kind of basic settings about when you're setting up a campaign,
Mm,
choosing to rotate your ads evenly, for
yeah,
example, is a really basic way to split test
exactly.
ads.
Yeah.
So on the Facebook ad side, you mentioned dynamic creative, Abby.
Hmm.
Um, what exactly is that, and what can advertisers do with it? Because it's a really cool feature,
Yeah, I think it's underused as well.
definitely.
Definitely. Um, Basically, dynamic creative means that you can serve an ad with different creative. So you could pick like 5 different creative options and serve it with the same headlines and see how it performs. But it gives you performance data like straight away, which is so key for any actions that you take for optimizing that account.
Yep.
And it's just, yeah, it's quick, and it can give you so much intelligence on what's going on and what's resonating with your audiences.
Yeah, I love the fact that you can run one ad with multiple images,
Yeah.
see what works, and because often it's kind of do you run a picture of the product? Do you run a picture of, like a lifestyle shot, to be
Yeah.
more aspirational? Do you run an ad with a picture of people in it? So to
Mm.
show, like, to humanize the message. And they all have very, very different results and performance. And being able to run that all in one go and find out exactly what's going on yeah, it's really
Yeah.
cool, isn't it?
I think it's really interesting because, like, sometimes you go into it with an idea in your head, like, "Ah, lifestyle shots with people, definitely going to be the one that works." And then it can be completely the other way around, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
Like,
there's one
so
client. Yeah,
interesting.
it's mental, isn't it? Like, there's one client at the moment that I was looking at with Ellie, and they've got
Mm.
really amazing lifestyle shots. But the stuff that sells is just a picture of the product.
And you can't guess it until you have that information in front of you.
And it's
Like,
really disappointing because you're like, I wanted that really cool one to work.
you're
It
kind of
didn't.
rooting for one of the creatives, aren't you? Like, that's the one I like,
Yeah.
that's the one I want to go
It just
well.
it goes to show, like, you don't know until you know, and you have to take that emotion out of the decision, you know.
Exactly.
Um, what about the split testing campaigns on Facebook versus, so, one option is to run dynamic creative, the other option is to run a split test campaign, kind of like Nina was saying you can do on Google Ads. What's your take on the split testing campaigns?
I don't really use it that much, to be
Okay.
honest. Like,
So,
if I was going to choose, I'd be using a dynamic creative test,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is the fast way of doing it.
so my take on it is, so the split test campaigns, you have to have a minimum budget. You have to set up a
Mm,
completely separate campaign to run it, and it takes it out of the structure so much. It removes it from your business as usual structure,
yeah.
and I just think the dynamic creative option is a much better route to go down.
Don't fix it if it ain't broke, right? Like,
If it
don't
ain't
don't
broke,
use something else for no reason if you've got dynamic testing which works. Yeah,
yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Um, but yeah, okay, cool. So, in terms of creative and messaging on PPC and paid social, like, what do you think are the biggest differences in approach? Because you can't run a paid social campaign like you run a PPC campaign, and you
No.
can't run a PPC campaign like you run a paid social campaign. So, what are the biggest differences, do you guys think, in approach?
I guess from a PPC perspective, you can do a lot more with text. So not only do you have the 3 headlines and the 2 description lines, you have the site links available, you have the call out extensions. So all the extensions available, it's additional text. So you
Yeah,
can communicate all of your USPs in text form, which can be an advantage. So people are seeing, exactly what you offer. They can read it. But then with social, obviously you have the imagery to your advantage. So on PPC, the only way we really can display imagery is if, for example, we use display ads, or on our shopping ads,
yeah,
see the product. So that's an advantage, but a lot of the time you can't really have that same element of visual control as you do
yeah.
on social ads. So I think that would be the biggest difference, is that we rely more on the text. You guys
Mm.
probably rely more on the what kind of creative is eye catching to an audience.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, on the account that we work together on, Nina, I think they really complement each other.
Mm,
Like how different they run.
for
Like
sure.
what. So social was a lot more kind of inspiring, I guess, like
Yeah.
inspiring and trying to catch people's attention really quickly. I mean, you've got such a short time span to stop someone from scrolling and
Mm,
actually read your ad. So the creative is so key
yeah.
there. It's so important. But yeah, I think it works really well. The kind of two different approaches, they
Yeah.
complement each other.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because it's almost as though the PPC side gives the consumer more of a reassurance. So, for example, the
Oh, the dogs
official,
have woken up.
yeah, the dog, I think he has something to say as well. I don't know if you,
The postman turned up.
yeah, it's it's really interesting because we tried to include emojis in some of our search ads, and it's not a feature that's really allowed. Whereas I know on social, it's almost like what you guys rely on, right? Like with one of our
Yeah,
beauty clients, all of the sparkle emojis and
Yeah,
the
the face with all the hearts on it and stuff.
all of
Yeah.
that. It's so effective for you guys, but with Google ads, we just can't really do it, which is a bit of a shame.
I
yeah,
I guess that's the difference, right? We can probably kind of personalize it a bit more,
Yeah,
yeah,
do things like that, add more kind of personal touches, more kind of personal call outs, I guess. But we do have to also be careful within Facebook's policy there
yes,
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
It's a fun road to travel sometimes. You're like,
Well,
why is it being disapproved? Why?
it's
I
good to
don't
push a few
understand.
limits. Yeah. Also, the context is totally different, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
Google, someone is actively looking for what you're selling. You're putting your brand in front of them at that specific point and trying to capture that interest. Facebook, no one goes onto Facebook to buy a product, right?
No.
So you're interrupting and trying to grab their attention in their social time. Like they're on Facebook to avoid those types of decisions in a way, aren't they?
Mm.
So it's just the context to, you know, when you're putting your offer in front of a customer is so different.
I think it's becoming different with Instagram though. I think Instagram is maybe becoming more of a place where people go to look at things.
for sure.
Maybe a little bit more like Pinterest,
Yeah.
especially with like the Explorer and stuff, and just how many like influencers there are
Yeah.
out there, pushing products and things. Actually, it's like completely unavoidable not to see advertising now, even in your kind of in your organic feed.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think it is changing how the platform's being used.
Yeah, for
Yeah, and
sure.
you've got Instagram shopping as well, haven't you? And
Hmm.
it's kind of almost gearing a bit more towards browsing for
Yeah,
product.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It's going to be interesting to see how that balance changes because at the end of the day, social is social.
mm,
So there's got to be a fine line between people's mindsets or like how far the platforms push the active shopping, and there'll always be a space for ads because you know if you're doing it in the right way and you're being creative and you're trying to inspire someone,
yeah,
then it will work. But yeah, that's a really interesting shift, I think, to see how that kind of pans out. I reckon
definitely.
For sure.
a trend to watch. So in terms of like you've got your testing going, you're using all these different features,
Mhm.
you're pushing your USPs, all that important stuff that we talked about. How do you measure and prove the success? Like what metrics out of all the metrics we can look at are your key metrics for an ad performance? Abby, do you want to kick off on the paid social side with that one?
Yeah, I mean, the glaringly obvious one is obviously ROAS. If
Yep.
people like it, they're going to buy. Like that's probably like the bottom line one that I always look at. But also things like click through rates, especially with creative, just seeing the kind of how much people are actually engaging with it and whether or not they're going to buy. But click through rate's an interesting one to look at.
Yep. Yeah.
And then, although it's not something that I hold too much stock in, engagement is also one that I look at. So I'll look at comments and things because sometimes just looking at the numbers, say like within Ads Manager, you can think, oh, the ad's doing well. And then you could go on and see that, maybe it's doing well for 50% of the people it's hitting. And for the other 50%, you've said something that has absolutely got them up the wrong way. And, so it's kind of keeping an eye on all of the elements, not just going, all right, that's got a good ROAS, that's fine.
Yeah, the sentiment in the comments I think is such an important thing, and it just it's one of it's one of those basic things like read the comments on your ads and
Yeah,
respond to them because they'll tell you whether you're hitting the right people in the right way or not, more than your click
absolutely.
through rate will.
Yeah.
Um,
Whether
and
your targeting's right.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
basic step that just gets missed so much because you just get funneled or like tunneled into this. Oh, CTR is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got 100 comments mugging you off.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
maybe not.
Yeah.
What about PPC, Nina?
PPC, it's a little bit more difficult to gauge because obviously we don't have that direct communication with consumers that you might
Mm.
on social ads, but there are definitely things that you can look at. Again, glaringly obvious, as Abby mentioned, we look at the conversions. Is the ad converting? Are people engaging with it? And then what I would look at is the click through rate. Are people actually engaging with the ad? They're clicking on it. Is it capturing their attention? So I would say conversions, conversion rate, and click through rate are definitely, some of the metrics that I look at. Especially with the split testing. So you want to measure it and you want to kind of weigh up, okay, this is a higher click through rate, but this has converted more. Which one do I want to prioritize?
Yeah,
So it's kind
yeah,
of deciding, okay, this one has more engagement, but even though this one doesn't have as many clicks, people are bought from it.
yeah,
So
Mm.
it's quite difficult to get that balance, but with my gut, I usually kind of do go for the one, okay, this one has relatively good click-through rate and people have been buying from it. I'm going to go with this one. So you've got to strike quite a fine balance between what is working and what is not.
yeah. I mean, if you're spending money on an ad, it has to convert, right? That's like you
Yeah,
say, that you both said, that's the number one thing, right?
Exactly.
absolutely.
Click-through rate and traffic and everything else is great, but relatively meaningless if no one's buying.
Buying from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Nina, do you
cool.
think it's interesting that you've got like so many different challenges on Google, like on search, like because you've got like such limited word count and stuff as well, like limited
Yeah,
characters and kind of a
absolutely.
limited space to be creative with it, right?
That is definitely something. So while you want to stand out as much as possible, you think, okay, my brain automatically goes to how can I do this in 30 characters? How can I do this in 90 characters? So it is a challenge. It's quite a fun challenge because you become very familiar with synonyms, um, which isn't a bad thing. I've learned many new words.
Don't pay Nina in Scrabble. She'll
Oh,
Yeah.
win.
yeah,
Do you find yourself texting in 30 characters? Like it's just so ingrained now.
absolutely everything. I just want to make it as succinct as possible, adhering to all of the characters. The most,
Birthday cards, the whole lot.
Yeah.
exactly. I'll write it in headlines and descriptions. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah.
Squid work. No
Yeah.
emojis.
No,
Yeah.
not doing emojis because that will be disapproved. But yeah, no, it is difficult because then I think what's really interesting about search ads is that you sometimes you get clients who not only want to kind of almost take over that aspect in that, for example, we've got a client where they are in the medical industry and they have a team of medic writers who write their ads obviously with our guidance, but then explaining to them all of the things like you need to include the keywords in the ads, and we have things like character limits. It's almost, it's quite an important thing you need to get across to them.
Yeah.
That there are limitations. So
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. There's definitely education there, isn't there?
hmm,
For people who aren't particularly familiar with the platform.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then it makes sense why they exist. You don't really want to read a text ad that's hundreds of characters long. It's going to completely put you off the buying process.
And there's just not the space for it.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah. Interesting points. But look, thanks so much, guys. That was a really interesting kind of discussion around messaging and creative. Abby, can we just quickly talk about your alpacas, your baby alpacas?
Elvis, Boris, and Colonel Tom.
Colonel Tom.
Is that what they're called?
That's what they're called. I did not
Amazing.
name them. Our guard alpacas.
Yeah. So, if anyone saw, like, if you follow us on Instagram, or if you don't, please do. We were kind of Abby put a little story up the other week about one of her alpacas, and there's 3 new babies. Can we expect some stories soon, Abby?
Yeah, definitely. So it's just difficult because I actually can't get that close to them because their purpose is to guard the chickens. So like they're literally guard alpacas. So I can go in and like chat to them. I think we're going to go and have lunch in their field today, actually. But like we can't like pet them or hand feed them or anything because then they won't chase off the foxes or the cats and stuff, and that's their job.
Wow. So you can't get them too tame.
No, I can't get them too tame. But basically, because the other one was an ass and used to like try and bite and kick and charge at me and stuff. He basically hated women, which was which was fun. We're just trying to get these rest in peace, Ace. But we're just trying to get the new ones to be a bit more used to people, but not too used to people.
Mm.
So it's tricky balance.
Parenting challenges there. Abby.
Oh my goodness.
Farm life.
Yeah, farm life. Excellent. Well,
Amazing.
look, thanks, guys, and yeah, I hope that was useful and interesting for everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.